And that's what distraction is all about. When we feel pain, when we feel lonely, stressed, anxious, fatigued, we reach for something to take our mind off the problem. And so if we can break that and ask ourselves, what am I escaping from here? Why can't I sit for 15 minutes with my family without checking the phone? Why can't I do one project at a time without constantly checking email or whatever the case might be? We have to get to the root cause of the problem. Let me tell you, it's not your phone, it's not the email. It's the fact that you don't have a method, a technique, a tool to deal with that discomfort in a healthier manner. So that's why time management is pain management. So Indistractable was really about my own struggle, that I found that I was struggling with distraction, and it was impacting various areas of my life. It was impacting my personal life, it was impacting my relationships, it was impacting my health even. I wasn't exercising, I wasn't eating right, I was constantly saying I would do something and wasn't following through, particularly when it came to work, in that I would say I would work on a big project and just procrastinate on it. And that's something, frankly, I've been struggling with for a long time, probably my whole life. I haven't had a ton of self-discipline and self-control, but it was almost easier when I wrote my first book because I wasn't that busy. And then after I wrote my first book, then I got really busy and I couldn't do the one thing that I needed to do the one thing that made me successful was the writing and the research. And it was hard to do because I was so busy with consulting engagements and speaking engagements after Hooked came out. And so I really wanted to figure out this antidote to distraction. How could I do what I said I was going to do? How could I live with personal integrity? I'm not a big fan of making sweeping generational generalizations. That it's hard to say that there's a generational shift. I think probably it has to do with a demographic equation that in a younger generation, younger individuals tend to bounce around. That's what people have always done when they get into a career and they're not really sure where they want to stay, what kind of job would suit them. It's probably, I think, a factor of two things that are actually not so sexy, not so exciting, which is that people have more job opportunities. The economy is doing very, very well, 3.5% unemployment, which means that people can jump around. In a bad economy, you stick with your job because you're afraid to lose it, so you keep the job you have. So it's probably a factor of one, the millennials are younger today, and people are still kind of finding what they want to do in their career professionally at a younger age, in that young age. And then two, people have more opportunities, so they're probably hopping around more looking for the right fit. And I think that's great. That's a luxury. When the economy turns, as it invariably will at some point, you're going to see a lot less job hopping. Let's first pinpoint the problem. The problem is clearly not the technology. Right? So let's make sure we're not blaming the wrong culprit. If your boss calls you at 8 p.m. on a Friday night when you're with your family for dinner, is that the telephone that your boss uses fault, or is it the fact that you work in a company culture where that's acceptable? So let's pin the blame where it should be pinned, which is on company culture. That distraction at work is a result of a dysfunctional company culture. Now, that being said, I have no problem with people working 24/7. I don't advocate for these, French-style laws that say by law you can only work 35 hours a week. I think that's ridiculous. I think people want to live in a society where they can work as much as they want to work. And so there is a factor of, look, if you don't know what you're getting into, you're going to be sorely surprised. You're going to be disappointed. So if you're going to work at a Wall Street bank, if you're going to work in a startup, that's part of the environment, right? That's part of the climate. If you have allergies, you probably shouldn't be a forest ranger, right? It's probably not going to be a good fit for you. And so if your values are about working a lot of hours and that's okay with you, I'm not going to tell you that shouldn't be your values. What I have a problem with is when companies bait and switch employees. When companies say, oh, this is a 40-hour work week environment, and then you get there and you realize, oh, it's 40 hours a week in the office, and then another 20, 30 hours outside the office. That's a lie. That's a bait and switch. And so this is why you see burnout. This is why you see employee retention problems. This is why you see high employee turnover, because employers are lying to people. So I'm fine with being clear about the expectations of how much somebody works, as long as we all know what we're getting ourselves into. Now, what happens if you get into a work environment And you find that the hours are what you expected, but the distraction is too much. So for example, you work in an open floor plan office, as many people do. People rate the number one source of distraction in the workplace today is not our phones, it's not our computers, it's other people, right? That is the number one source of distraction. And so we can fix that by changing the company culture. How do we do that? We start with ourselves. So when we ourselves become indistractable, we set an example for others. When we time box our calendar, when we hack back the external triggers, when we use some simple techniques, we're spreading a message like that screen sign that says, hey, you know what? Not all day, but for 45 minutes a day, for an hour a day, I put up the screen sign that tells my colleagues, I need to focus right now. Nobody's going to object to that, right? As long as you make clear when your hours, when you're doing reactive work and when you're spending your time doing reflective work and you need to focus, as long as people understand what's going on, there shouldn't be a problem with that. Through doing that, you're setting an example for others. And it's not going to happen quickly, and it's not going to happen in every organization, mind you. But I think some organizations, and what I talk about in the book is companies like Slack, like Boston Consulting Group, who have these company cultures where distraction is not a problem because they exhibit these three traits of a company that is indistractable. Number one, they give people psychological safety, meaning people can talk about the problem without getting fired. Number two, they give people a forum to talk about the problem. And number three, management exemplifies what it means to becoming indistractable. And so at a company like Slack, they have on the company walls, it's written bright pink neon letters, work hard and go home. This from a company that everybody blames for making this product that's so distracting. Well, if it's the technology that's doing it, they should be the most distracted people on earth because who uses Slack more than Slack? But that's not the case. They don't suffer from distraction like other companies do because they exhibit these three traits. And so the real problem of distraction is that we can't talk about the problem of distraction. That's the problem. It's a company culture where people feel like if they talk about their problems, they're going to get fired. And this is what we see at every instance of corporate malfeasance, whether it's Enron or Tyco or Boeing with the 737 MAX disaster. It's always this problem. People know what's going on. They know things are screwed up, but they don't want to talk about it because they're afraid of getting fired. That's the real problem with distraction, because it turns out once people talk about the problem, they can solve it. It's a problem like any other problem. It's like a dysfunctional family, right? Everybody knows dad's an alcoholic, but nobody wants to talk about the problem, so the problem doesn't change, right? And so that's the key insight here, is the problem of distraction is that we can't talk about the problem. You know, the interesting part about the identity packs is I came across that in the psychology of religion, that we know that religions use this identity to help us become more consistent with what we say we're going to do. So if you call yourself a devout Muslim, an observant Christian, even a vegetarian, it takes off some of the decision-making load, because a vegetarian doesn't wake up every morning and say, I wonder if I should have some bacon, right? No, they don't do that. They are vegetarian, and vegetarians don't eat meat. So it becomes much easier for them to stay on track. And it turns out we can do the same thing by calling ourselves indistractable. And the interesting part here is that we've been here before. That I remember as a kid, I grew up in the early 80s, and I remember back then, people would come over to our house and smoke cigarettes in our living room without even asking. Now that seems ridiculous, right? You would never do that today, to smoke in someone's living room. Well, what changed? It wasn't a law that changed, it was our customs, our norms, our manners. People started saying, I remember when my mom first told people when they came over, hey, we're not smokers, so go outside, please. She lost friends over that. That was like a very strange thing to ask people. Well, today, everybody who's a non-smoker says, of course, please go outside. You can't smoke in my living room. Smokers wouldn't even dare. But it took that identity. It took people saying, I'm not a smoker. This is who I am. If this is not the customs that I have in my home. And the same thing is happening when it comes to becoming indistractable. When people start calling themselves indistractable and saying, you know what? I do some unusual things. Right? I use a screen sign. I don't respond to every text message in 30 minutes. I don't, let technology and distractions control my life. I'm indistractable. Is that any different from someone wearing unusual religious garb or having an unusual diet? No. It's our choice to say, this is who I am. I do not let other people decide my attention and my life. I decide for myself. Yeah, it definitely is a mind warp, because I think many people think we do things to feel good. But actually, even the pursuit of pleasurable sensations is an escape from discomfort, right? When you want something, when you crave it, when you desire, that is itself psychologically destabilizing. I talked to professional football players, and one of them, in fact, told me that this concept was kind of jarring. Like he said, wait, I'm in pain all the time. Like what I do for a living requires me to be in pain. It's hard work, so I still do it. And he wasn't convinced by this idea. But then later on, we had this discussion. About 20 minutes later, he said, you know what, Nir? You're actually right. Because the reason I went on that field every day, the reason I did what I did, was because not doing it was more painful than doing it. Right? So it was still pain, it's still discomfort. And that doesn't mean that that somehow we shouldn't do things that are pleasurable. Quite the opposite. The idea here is that we should understand that when we don't do the things we want to do, it's for one reason. That our brain has figured out an easier way, a way with less effort to remove the discomfort. And that's what distraction is all about. When we feel pain, when we feel lonely, stressed, anxious, fatigued, we reach for something to take our mind off the problem. And so if we can break that and ask ourselves, what am I escaping from here? Why can't I sit for 15 minutes with my family without checking the phone? Why can't I do one project at a time without constantly checking email or whatever the case might be? We have to get to the root cause of the problem. Let me tell you, it's not your phone, it's not the email. It's the fact that you don't have a method, a technique, a tool to deal with that discomfort in a healthier manner. So that's why time management is pain management. I wrote this book for me more than anyone. The book is for me, and if other people benefit from it too, that's wonderful. I'm really happy. But fundamentally, I want to solve my own problem, and I've accomplished that. It took me 5 years to write the book because for the first 3 years, I was still very distracted. And it wasn't still until I discovered the 4 most important pillars to becoming indistractable and started to apply those in my life. Today, I am in the best shape of my life. I used to be clinically obese. For the first time in my life, I exercise consistently. I eat healthy consistently. I have a better relationship with my wife than I ever have. We've been married for 18 years. I spend more quality time with my daughter. And most importantly, well, maybe not most importantly, equally importantly, I'm professionally much more fulfilled because at the end of each day, I look at the day and I say, I did what I said I'm going to do. I'm honest with myself. And being honest with yourself it's a feeling I think a lot of people don't experience because we get to the end of our day and we look at our stupid to-do list and we still haven't done everything. And so day after day, we feel like losers because you didn't get everything done. As opposed to when you live in an indistractable manner, when you are indistractable, you go through a day and you say, I did what I said I'm going to do. And that is a great feeling because you're being honest with yourself. I think I've learned many lessons, but I would argue that I would not have learned those lessons without making those mistakes. And so given that I'm happy with how things turned out, I think those lessons, those failures could be seen as growth opportunities. I think it's self-compassion rather than self-criticism. I think there's a big difference. Brene Brown talks about this between guilt and shame. That you can feel guilty, you can learn about an experience, but guilt is what you did. Shame is who you are. So you can say, what I did was not correct, but that's the action. It's not the person. It's not the individual. So shame is not a very healthy emotion. But guilt or looking back on something, saying that was suboptimal, what I learned from it, is an element of self-compassion. And we know people who are more self-compassionate are much more likely to reach the long-term goals. And that comes from accepting that we can grow, we can get better by learning about what we could have done better. And the way we do that is to talk to ourselves the way we would talk to a good friend. That most of us, at least I certainly was this way, we talk to ourselves in a very critical manner. I mean, the conversation in my head was very, very critical, and it wasn't helpful. Yeah. And so instead, I've changed that conversation with myself to acknowledge that when I mess up, it's a growth opportunity, as opposed to trying to say that I'm bad, which doesn't help us grow, because you can't escape yourself. You are the individual. But if you say that I am bad, you can't escape that. When you say what I did is bad and I could learn from that, well, that is something you don't have to encounter time and time again, because you can change your behavior for the future. Well, I think for the next year or so, I'm going to keep trying to spread the message of how to become indistractable. I just launched the book a couple months ago, so I think there's a lot of people out there who could really benefit from these techniques, and I'm hoping that people will someday proudly say, I am indistractable, which means that you don't think that technology is the devil and technology is trying to hijack your brain. I think that's a bunch of rubbish. I want to spread an empowering, tech-positive approach to doing what we say we're going to do, because I think right now it really bothers me that there's such a negative, cynical outlook that is perpetuated in the media onto technology, and I think that that's a real problem. And so I want to try and fight that message, because it's not an empowering one. When we think that technology is hijacking our brain, that it's addicting everyone, it's not only is it not scientifically true, it also is something that leads towards learned helplessness. It tells people, well, there's nothing you can do about it, right? And it makes people not even try. And so that's what I want to do for the next year, is to spread this message of how people can become indistractable to live the kind of lives they want.